So do you think it's of his own making? In other words, do you think had he pled guilty or just, not appealed and done his time or whatever, that this would be over for him?
Well, yeah, certainly in terms of the consequences. Yeah, I mean, if he had just not appealed, served his sentence, he'd probably be done. He'd probably be home now. And like Chuck McGee, he'd probably be back working for the Republican Party. So
Now, but it's almost like he's facing a more serious situation here. I mean, lying to a federal agent is a 5-year sentence each count. So I imagine the guidelines are higher than election fraud, or
well, I'm not, I'm not a sentencing attorney. I can't tell you, but I can tell you what I know about the process. And because he actually has an acquittal, he has a clean record.
right.
And so they would go into that sentencing cleanly as well. So what's the judge going to take into account? Well, if he's found guilty on false statements, they'll take that into account. They may or may not, and I would actually stress that they should not take into account the acquittal, that process. But maybe they will. I don't know. But the other thing is he's still looking at the results of the appeal, the en banc appeal, on November 3rd.
So he could have 2 hits now.
Well, then he could be looking at 4 counts. That's really something to make your stomach turn. I mean, I can tell you, don't wake up in the morning feeling good.
Now, we have obviously an election in 2 weeks, and yesterday Colin Powell came out and literally blasted the Republican Party and their tactics, a lot of the tactics that you have condemned in the past. What do you think about that? And can you talk about the tactics that the Republicans have used, including
Sure.
the robocalls in this election?
Yeah, well, there's certainly the robocalls, the heirs calls, and I think, like I said, I think those just were dead DOA, dead on arrival. There's been some mailers in Virginia, clearly trying to trigger a bigoted reaction. It's the piece with it's basically a piece of mail, kind of like looking like faded parchment, yellow parchment. The eyes are such that it looks at first glance, and when you just quickly glance at it, it looks like it's the eyes of Senator Obama. It turns out they're the eyes of Osama bin Laden. It talks about, evil and terrorism and all this stuff. So clearly there's a linkage when you have the Bill Ayers message of Senator Obama pals around with terrorists, which on its face is just nonsense. If you really get into the counterintelligence program and everything that was going on in the day, it's a pretty interesting story. But again, was never convicted of anything. In fact, the charges were dropped. Clearly a member of the Weathermen, and Obama's condemned that, but without getting into all of that nonsense. On one hand, you have the charge that he pals around with terrorists. On the other, then you have these mailers that come in talking about terrorism and Osama bin Laden. That's not a leap of anything. That's just the obvious next charge. So I think that that's the coordinated. And when I say coordinated, I don't mean people are sitting on the phone saying, you do this, I'll do this. They just pick up on each other's cues, and it makes sense because they're all looking at the same polling data, and they know what they have to try and do, plus they're working off gut instinct. Problem with that is, as I said earlier, in the face of real life true events, it's just not resonating. Then when you have Colin Powell step forward and then make these condemnations around the Muslim issue, that speaks volumes, because that means to me that the people in the positions of authority that I used to look to when I worked at the RNC are still talking about this religious faith issue. Boy, is that going down the wrong road, because that's not looking for a real message, a real winning message. That's looking for a way to, basically cheat on the margins.
So are you saying this is a wedge issue that you don't think is working now?
Well, I think it works for some people. But I think it doesn't work broadly, and it doesn't work where it needs to work. It may work wonders in Crawford, Texas, but that doesn't mean it's doing anything for you in Missouri.
Now, you saw what McCain and McCain's people did with the whole anti-American, pro-American gig, and especially recently in Virginia, where Northern Virginia seems to be anti-American and Southern American.
Right.
I mean, do you think that this works anywhere?
No, look, I mean, Northern Virginia is home to the Pentagon, numerous active and retired military. To label those people living in an anti-American Republic of Northern Virginia, whatever that is, it's just nonsense. I do think that there was not enough blowback on that, the real patriotic America versus the rest, because that clearly you're looking to make a distinction there. What I do think it speaks to is Palin herself, and I think that's the other problem. You can push all of these wedge issues as far as you want, but when you have a top of the ticket that is running counter to the sea change that the country, I think, is considering, and you've got the other half of the top of that ticket, Governor Palin, who just does not pass the smell test, you've got a recipe for disaster, and really no wedge issue or racial politicking or any other type of dirty trick, I think, can trump those liabilities.
Now, last time we talked, you were lamenting the fact that the moderate Republicans, which you consider yourself being part of, that they have been pushed off to the side by the right wing. Now, do you think that maybe now there's going to be a reawakening of the whole Goldwater Republican?
It's hard to say, because it's going to be frankly, whoever steps up in the Republican Party, assuming John McCain loses. Let's assume. And I'm not saying that that's going to necessarily happen. It's still going to be a close election. I think clearly the trend is towards Senator Obama, but let's not make that assumption just yet. But let's make the assumption that if he were to lose, in order to answer your question, it's going to be up to whoever becomes the next Republican National Committee chairman. That's a very key next chapter in the Republican Party, and that's going to determine where they're going from here, particularly if they have massive losses at the ballot box. And what you have to keep in mind and who's in the wings. So you got Governor Palin in the wings, clearly, who's going to try and build this into a national effort for 4 years from now. Again, making the assumption that it's President-elect Obama. You've got guys like Haley Barbour, who I think beats Palin hands down very quickly in that contest. But whoever it is, that's going to speak volumes as to where the party itself is going. As far as the moderate Republicans, I think they're islands unto themselves. Collins and Olympia Snow in Maine, and you've got pockets of them wherever, and they work together where they can. But they're certainly now doesn't seem to me like they are part of the mainstream Republican Party.
But when you see somebody like Colin Powell completely decimate the entire platform and basically cut the legs off the Republican Party yesterday, it seems like there should be some awakening there.
Well, it depends on who you are, I suppose. I think that's what I meant was they're islands unto themselves. They kind of exist in their circumstances. I think Colin Powell's point was very salient for this election. Now, I know that it was very quickly labeled by Rush Limbaugh and others as a racial choice. And, I understand their logic and how they're trying to make that case. I do think that Powell is a guy who kind of transcends race. So I think that it's a very legitimate rationale which he gave. And it was very well thought out. He presented it extremely well. I watched it, certainly. Is that a clarion call to moderate Republicans? I don't know. I'm actually not a Republican. I'm neither one or the other. I think that even moderate Republicans have some questions about Senator Obama's agenda, largely around taxes. But as I say to them, don't worry. I mean, we've already spent all the money. There's nothing he can spend money on. So